On this episode of This Week in Linux, we're going to check out a lot of distro news from openSUSE, Antergos, Kali Linux, BlackArch, and Tails. Xfce is getting closer to releasing their next big version, 4.14, so we'll take a look at that for the first pre-release. We'll also got some new app releases for Firefox, Tor Browser, KDE's Elisa music player, and a new file search called Drill. Later in the show, we'll check out some interesting news from GitHub and their sponsor program, as well as some rather unfortunate news for an Android-related smartphone company, Huawei. Then we'll finish out the show with some deals for Linux games and some interesting ebooks from the Humble Bundle. All that and much more coming up. I'm Michael Tennell with TuxDigital, and this is your weekly source for Linux good news. Before we get started with today's episode, I wanted to just give you an update for the Linux is Everywhere sale that I mentioned earlier in the week. There's actually been an extension to the sale, so if you didn't get a chance to do it previously, the sale has been extended to basically through Memorial Day, because it was supposed to end earlier this morning on Saturday, which was when this show is being streamed, but instead it's been extended. So if you are looking for it, you can get 10% off by using the FanFave coupon code. You just use that code in your checkout. When you check out in the cart, it'll have an option for the coupon. Just put it in there, FanFave. It is in the. I'll have it in the description. If you're listening to the audio version of this show, in the description and the show notes, we'll have the code for you there as well. So yeah, let's get to the show. A version of the show this week is openSUSE Leap 15.1 has been released, and this is actually pretty interesting, and it's good timing because we also had Richard Brown, the openSUSE chairman, interviewed on the latest episode of Destination Linux, which was episode 122. So I'll have a link to that in the show notes if you'd like to check it out. It's live right now, so once you're watching this, you can, or if you're live stream, you could check it out later. It's a very interesting interview. I think it's one of our best so far. So if you would like to check it out, I highly suggest it. But the latest release of 15.1 Leap is interesting because it's really just an update and a maintenance improvement to Leap rather than a huge new release. But what's really interesting, they do a lot of unique things in their versions of their releases. Because, for example, they have the Linux kernel 4.12 in this particular version of openSUSE Leap. But that sounds like a really old version, right? And the version 4.12 is pretty old, but what they do differently is that they also backport a lot of stuff from newer kernels. So if you have some kind of hardware that needed support for like 4.19, for example, you can still use Leap to get it because they backported all of the hardware support and graphics support stuff into 4.12. So the version is an old version, but all the support is still available. And that's a really interesting thing to do for a stable release like openSUSE Leap. They've also improved a lot of stuff, like they've improved support for high DPI displays. They've actually used the network manager by default now for both laptops and desktops. They've done a lot of security updates for like the MDS and stuff. And they've also improved the look and feel for Yast. So Yast is a really cool tool. It's a really interesting project because it has a lot of features. It's really well organized. It gives you a lot of access to doing lots of stuff really easily, but it doesn't look the best. So they've actually improved a little bit there with some new icons. So that's good. It still needs a little bit of work as far as like the polishing of the design, but functionally it's fantastic. So, well done for that. They've also updated the latest version of their GNOME install to 3.26. Not the latest version of GNOME, but it's the one that's available in Leap. They've also done some improvements to Qt and Plasma as well. So if you'd like to check it out, openSUSE Leap 5.1 is available right now. I'll have a link to it in the show notes. If you want the latest and greatest version of everything, openSUSE also has that as a rolling release for openSUSE Tumbleweed, so that is available as well. And also be sure to check out the interview that we had with Richard Brown, the openSUSE chairman, on Destination Linux, episode 122. Link to that in the show notes as well. Up next in the show is the pre-release of Xfce 4.14. So 4.14 has been in development for quite a while. It's actually been about 4 years since the previous version of 4.12, and there's really not confirmed yet. There's actually been they're hoping to have 4.14 fully released in August of this year, but they haven't given a firm date because they typically do a release structure on it's done when it's done, and that's when we release. So a lot of projects do that, and that's a fair assessment because you don't want to release it when it's not done. So sure. And this particular release right now is a pre-release, so it's basically alpha. So it's closer to what will be available. But so like this is the first version that you could use that is 4.14. The rest of them, the other distros, will be using like pre-development or even pre-release alpha stuff. So now, if you wanted to try it, depending on what distro might ship it, that you could get, you can try out what's coming in 4.14. But some of the major features in 4.14 include a complete retooling of the applications and toolkit because they're now switching to GTK3, which it was previously GTK2. So UI improvements such as allowing users to trigger scripts on logout, restart, and suspend has been added as well. They've also done added vertical blank support to XFWM4, and GTK3 window scaling for high DPI support has been improved. So that's nice because one of the issues with Xfce in the past has been just there's not, because it's based on GTK2 and because it needed to be transitioned to 2 to 3 to get high DPI support. Using it on a high res monitor was kind of awkward. So now you can do that. Well, we'll soon be able to do that, I guess, is a better way of saying that. And there's been a lot of other stuff improved for, like the fail-safe session has been fixed to use startup priority groups versus just opening everything at session start. So if your system crashes, it will be able to restart the things that you were using at the time. So that's pretty cool. And a lot of other stuff is coming out. We're actually going to talk about this particular topic more in depth in Xfce 4.14 for Destination Linux in the next episode, which will be released next week. So if you're interested in that, I will not have a link in the show notes because the show's not been recorded yet. But hey, I'll have a link to the Xfce 4.14 pre-release blog post if you'd like to check out that and find out more about it in the show notes. Up next in the show is some rather unfortunate news, and that is Antergos has decided to discontinue their distribution. So after about 7 years of development, they have decided that they no longer have the free time to properly maintain Antergos, and they decided to discontinue it. On their blog post, they say, "We came to this decision because we believe that continuing to neglect the project would be a huge disservice to the community. Taking this action now, while the project's code is still in works, provides an opportunity for interested developers to take what they find useful and start their own projects." Which is actually kind of good because there's a silver lining to this, and actually there's a couple silver linings to this. Because if you're not aware, first of all, Antergos is a distribution that is a derivative, fork-ish sort of thing to Arch. But it's also 100% compatible with Arch, so anything that you install from the Arch repos or from the AUR would still be compatible with Antergos, so you wouldn't have like any kind of breakage points because of that. It's also very interesting because if you were to install Antergos and then remove everything that was Antergos, then you would have an Arch system. But Antergos created their own custom stuff like custom theming. They had their own custom repos that they maintained certain packages that Arch didn't, and all sorts of different things. So Antergos wasn't like just an installer, even though that was very common for people to say that it was an installer for Arch. It was, it technically was kind of, but also at the same time it had its own extra layer on top, like I guess an extra layer of icing of Antergos stuff that sat on top of Arch. So yes and no. It was a hybrid that doesn't really have a term for really what it was, but that's kind of the gist of it. But anyway, there are some users who decided that they want to continue to make Antergos go. So they have created a new project based on the Antergos code that is now just codenamed Endeavor and doesn't really have an actual name of the distro. They're actually having a community suggestions of what the name could be, and you could go to the Antergos forums to participate in that discussion if you'd like to. But that forum will also be removed in about 3 months or so. What's interesting, though, is that the developers of Antergos said that there's no need to worry about your installed systems as they will continue to receive updates directly from Arch. And they say soon we will release an update that will remove Antergos repos from your system, along with any Antergos-specific packages that no longer serve a purpose due to the project ending. Once that is completed, any packages installed from the Antergos repo that are in the AOR will begin to receive updates from there. So if you are using Antergos, there might be some packages that are basically taken from the AUR, packaged, and then put into the Antergos repos. And instead, they'll be transitioning you back to the AUR version. And so that's kind of like really interesting, because it essentially says that if you were wanting to use Antergos right now, you could still technically install Antergos, and then once this transition phase happens, you would then have Arch, and all the Antergos stuff will be removed. So from now to 3 months or so, whenever, I don't know, actually, you could still technically install Antergos and still have a system running even after the Antergos project officially ends, like completely. So that's an interesting thing, because it means that if you were already a user, you don't have to worry about losing your system, because there's we had a very interesting discussion on the live stream today in the Discord server. We were talking about how this is a problem with some distributions, because not being a mainstream, you have a small amount of developers, and having a small amount of developers means if anybody wants to leave, they lose a significant percentage of their development base, and potentially the distro might collapse completely. And in this case, there was a very small amount of developers. I was actually a contributor to Antergos for a while. I haven't really done so in a significant amount of time. And that's also true for the current developers as well. And that's why they wanted to discontinue the project, because they didn't have the time to do it. But even so that they're doing this, because it's based on Arch, and because it's so closely compatible with Arch, removing the stuff that makes Antergos just leaves you with Arch. So your system is not completely broken if you wanted to continue using Arch. And I think that's a really interesting thing, because it shows how different the Antergos development was to other things like Manjaro, which is a complete fork of Arch. So I just thought that was worth mentioning. And also, I think it's really interesting because it kind of gives you another takeaway to the point of, if you are using a particular distro, letting them know that you are using it and giving them your thanks, whether that's financial support or just giving them encouragement, might go a long way to have them continue development of the software over the distro. Because I don't know if it's just because they said it because they're doing it in their free time and they're not being paid to work on Antergos. They weren't able to, devote time anymore to do it. So maybe if they were being paid because the community was giving them contributions or something, that might have changed it. I don't know. But it's still really interesting that you could install Antergos right now and then wait to get updates from this change, and then it transitions directly to Arch. I think that's pretty interesting, and it might not deter people from using Antergos even now, but in about 3 months, there won't be an option at all. So I think it's pretty cool that they're doing it this way, but I do think it's really unfortunate Antergos is gone. So if you'd like to learn more about this or read the blog post for Antergos project ending, I'll have a link to it in the show notes. Firefox 67 has been released this week, and this is a really good one because it has a lot of improved performance thanks to a number of changes. They've lowered the priority of setting the set timeout during page load. They have now delayed component initialization until after startup. The painting of the pages happens sooner during page load, but it also happens less often. Suspending unused tabs has been improved, which is really nice because there's actually been a way to suspend tabs that where you have to manually make the tab not run anymore, or you have to close the browser and then reopen it, and then everything that you're not currently using is suspended, which is a cool feature. But now it's going to automatically suspend the tabs if they're not been used for a certain amount of time. Very cool. They've also improved the keyboard accessibility in the latest version of Firefox. Toolbar and Toolbar Overflow menu are both now fully keyboard accessible, which is really cool. Because there's also been a lot of stuff that I wanted to do with the keyboard that you couldn't do, even though you kind of can manipulate it and get it to do it. But now It's making basically everything able to do it. The overflow menu, like the hamburger menu, is actually really cool because it's been a long time since when you used to be able to modify and put in the like the quick search. That was like the main address bar. Then there was a search box. If you put the search box into that menu, you could activate the menu by activating that small search box, which was Control K. You don't have to do that anymore. So because of this new feature, allows you to get access to that menu without having to do this manipulation thing. But anyway, that's pretty cool. They've also done a lot of other things for improving the keyboard access, as for like access to add-ons and the downloads panel and some other stuff. So that's really cool. There's been a lot of other improvements for including users will be able to now run different Firefox installs side by side by default, so that you can run the beta and the release version simultaneously, or like the beta and the developer version at the same time. So that's very cool, because it used to be like an issue where the different the profiles would conflict, so you could only use one at a time. Now you can do multiples, so that's really cool. I'm also going to be doing some specific videos for Firefox in the future soon, because I'm going to do some videos that are talking about specific features that I'm a big fan of for Firefox, as well as like the 5 reasons that I choose Firefox and why it's my favorite browser. I'm going to do those videos within the next week, at least one of the videos within the next week, coming week. So be sure to subscribe if you're wanting to check that out. There's one of the things that I really love is the multi-account container system. They actually have, like, that's one of the reasons that it's probably the main reason that I use Firefox. That feature is fantastic. And I recently found a way to improve that feature by setting it up where it will connect using some additional add-ons to make it so that if you save a particular bookmark in a certain way, that it will automatically open that bookmark into that particular container, which is awesome, because it's something I've been wanting to do for a very long time. Now I figured out how to do that, and I'm going to make a video about that as well. So anyway, if you'd like to learn more about Firefox 67 release notes, I'll have the link to those in the show notes, as well as the blog post talking about that particular release in the show notes. Up next in the show is the latest release of Tor Browser. 8.5 has been released, and this version of Tor Browser is actually included a stable release for Android. So you can use Tor Browser 8.5 on both your desktop, laptop, and on Android, which is really cool, because they actually did have support in an experimental thing for a while, but this is the first stable release for Android with the Tor browser, which is awesome. The features included in the Android version are 0 proxy bypasses. First-party isolation is enabled to protect you from cross-site tracking. Most of the fingerprinting defenses are working. They do mention that there are still some feature gaps between the desktop and the Android version of the Tor browser, but it does provide essentially the same protections overall. And with the 8.5 browser, you also get security slider right from the toolbar without having to navigate through menus to find it. It comes with a redesigned UI using Firefox Photon and a new logo. There are many other tweaks and bug fixes included, so go download the version for Firefox or desktop if you want to check it out. I actually like the fact that they're doing the Android version, because I use Firefox on the Android, but I tried out the Tor version in the previous versions that they offered, and it was kind of clunky and it didn't really work that well. So I'm really happy to see that the Tor browser is now a full stable release on Android. So that is awesome. If you're not familiar with Tor browser, it's using the Tor as a browser specifically made for the Tor network for privacy and security reasons, and it's made by the Tor project. So if you would like to check it out, I'll have a link to it in the show notes below. This episode of This Week in Linux is sponsored by you, actually, the patrons of TuxDigital. Whether you're a patron on Patreon or Sponsus. Sponsus technically calls them sponsors, but it's easier for me to say patron for everything, because that way when I make tweets and etc., I just use one term that applies to everyone. It's easier for me. Anyway, so if you've ever wanted to contribute to the channel and support the channel and keep it going, becoming a patron for as low as $1 a month on Patreon or as low as $3 a month on Sponsus goes a long way to help me continue to make content for This Week in Linux, as well as the channel in general, which, by the way, I'll be doing a lot more coming up soon. I actually have a video I'm doing for a review and overview of Ubuntu Touch. as well as many other things. I'll make a list and put it into the patrons. So whether you're Sponsus or Patreon, I'll actually give you like a what's coming on the roadmap type list. So if you're curious why there's a $3 one for Sponsus and $1 for Patreon, well, it's because Patreon has a polling system, so the fees are a little lower, and it makes it more reasonable, whereas Sponsus uses individual transaction fees, so that the fee percentage would be higher for a $1 donation on Sponsus versus Patreon. However, that only applies to this channel because Patreon has changed their entire fee structure completely. And if you are new to Patreon, if you're a newer creator on Patreon, you have the same fee system that Sponsus does, so it doesn't really even matter. But because I have an older version, like a grandfathered in version of Patreon account, I don't have to deal with that new structure. So there's that. That's why there's a $1 versus $3 version. But if you'd like to support the channel, any amount is awesome and very much appreciated. And we're actually doing a test right now so that if you are a patron, you can join the Discord server and be a part of the stream in voice form during this particular live stream. And in the future, we're going to test some more and see how it works. But yeah, so if you would like to come to the channel, I'd very much appreciate it. You can go to TuxDigital.com/Patreon or TuxDigital.com/Sponsus to become a Patreon, either one of those. Or you can go to TuxDigital.com/contribute to find other ways like affiliate links and the Linux is Everywhere t-shirt and etc. So yeah. Up next in the show is the latest release of Kali Linux. 2019.2 has been released this week. And this release is mostly like some various tweaks, some bug fixes, and that kind of thing. But there's also some tools that have been updated, like SEC list, SEC list, MSFPC, and exe2hex package have been updated, as well as some others. But one of the things I wanted to talk about this is because they have this new, it's relatively new feature or project from Kali Linux called NetHunter. And NetHunter is an Android ROM overlay that includes a robust mobile penetration testing platform. That's how they describe it. The overlay includes a custom kernel, Kali Linux Truth setup, and accompanying like their own Android application. And it also features an easier interaction with various security tools and attack vectors. So beyond the penetration testing tools that comes with Kali Linux, you also get access to support for several additional classes like hid keyboard attacks, bad USB attacks. Bad USB is the name of the attack stuff. Evil AP mana attacks, and some many more. So this is really cool. I want to talk about this because this is a small release overall for Kali Linux, but the biggest release part of it is that NetHunter now supports over 50 devices running Android, whether that's from using KitKat all the way to Pi, the current version. So and they said in honor of this update, they have released 13 new NetHunter images for the latest Android versions. Nexus 6 with you running Pi. Nexus 6P has Oreo version. OnePlus 2 has a Pi version, and the Galaxy Tab S4 Wi-Fi and LTE versions have Oreo now to be used with NetHunter. So this is pretty cool because it gives you the ability to use Android as well as Kali tools inside of your Android phone. And I would say that it's definitely not a daily driver. Don't use this for your daily driver because you could just say that about, if you're not a professional pen tester, then you should not be using anything that is pen testing related like Kali Linux or anything like that, like Parrot OS or whatever, as your daily driver, regardless of what kind of device you're using it on, because they're not intended to do that. If you are a professional pen tester, then it totally makes sense to be your daily driver because that's your job. But otherwise, don't do that, because specifically in the frequently asked questions, Kali Linux says to not do that unless it is your job. So, with that said, if you were interested in checking out the latest version, or if you have a spare device, smartphone, or whatever to try it out with the NetHunter stuff, I do think it's pretty cool. So I'll have a link to both Kali Linux 2019.2 and the NetHunter project in the show notes. Up next in the show is to continue on with the security research distro or penetration distro. We're going to talk about BlackArch. BlackArch is Arch-based, and it's a penetration and security research distro, as I said. And it has over 2,100, almost 2,200 tools at its disposal for penetration testing. Some of the key features of the latest release of 2019.06.01, which is an interesting thing because it's like if you look at the blog post for their website, it says that it was released on June 1st, but it's not June 1st yet. And it's already been released, actually, because if you can go download the ISOs right now, but for some reason it's, Anyway, so in this release, they've added more than 150 new tools. They've added Jedi Vim plugin, and they've updated the other Vim plugins, as well as they've included the latest kernel of 4.1.4. What? 5.1.4. That's the actual latest kernel and the version that they are actually shipping. I don't know. So they've also done some cleanups and tweaks to the ISOs for the BlackArch installer for version 1.1.1. They've updated all of their BlackArch tools and packages for their specific stuff, as well as all their system packages, including some updates to their window managers like Awesome, Fluxbox, and OpenBox. But it's pretty interesting overall because BlackArch is an interesting distribution. So if you are Arch user and you want to use, you want to do penetration testing, then BlackArch is a good option for that because you actually get really, it's a rolling release and you get updates really quickly, that kind of thing. But again, the same thing applies to BlackArch that applies to Kali Linux. Do not use it as your daily driver because it's not meant for that. But if you are interested in checking it out, I'll have a link to it in the show notes. Up next in the show is another security distro, although not necessarily for that purpose. It's a security and privacy distro, and that is Tails. Version 3.14 has been released, and this release updates the Linux kernel to 4.19.37. It also updates most of the firmware packages, and it should improve the support for newer hardware for graphics, Wi-Fi, and etc. due to the update of the kernel. They've also enabled all available mitigations for the MDS stuff, the micro-architectural data sampling, aka zombie load, attacks, and disable the SMT, simultaneous multi-threading, on all vulnerable processors to fix the Riddle, Fallout, and zombie load security. Riddle? Is it right? I don't know. Security vulnerabilities. They've also updated their version of Tor Browser to the latest version that just came out of Tor Browser 8.5. So if you need, for any particular reason, for having a distribution that is heavily focused on privacy and security, and also is the amnesic type of distro where it will delete the data after when you reboot and that kind of thing, then Tails is a fantastic distribution for doing that. And I recently found out that there's also a fork or a related distribution called Heads, thanks to the live stream today. If you check out we stream the show live every Saturday, typically every Saturday. And this particular episode, we talked about Heads and Tails, which is kind of funny because Heads and Tails. Anyway, so if you'd like to check it out, I'll have a link to Tails 3.14 in the show notes. I just wanted to take a break from the show just for like a little bit to remind you about the fact that I'm going to be at the Southeast LinuxFest this year, which will be happening at June 14th through the 16th in Charlotte, North Carolina. So if you are in the area and you'd like to come to a conference, I think that Self is a really good option to go that because it's a conference, but also it's like a giant meetup because there's a lot of social stuff. There's like parties at the end of the days for each day, and there's a lot of extracurricular activities that not just the conference stuff. So it's a pretty cool conference to attend, and I will also be there as well as the rest of the Destination Linux crew to do a lot of different things. I'll actually be doing 2 different talks. I'll be doing a talk for Kdenlive, basically explaining my streamlined approach to doing editing in Kdenlive, as well as like beginner to advanced techniques. I'll also be doing another talk where this talk is about open source marketing, the do's and don'ts and how-tos. That's the title of the talk. And we'll also be doing a Destination Linux live, I don't know if it's going to be streamed, but a live episode from the Self floor where we'll be maybe talking about the people who were at the conference, people giving talks and that kind of thing. So it'll be really interesting. And we also will more than likely have a couple special guests show up there as well. So you should definitely check out that episode when it happens in June. So if you're interested in checking out SELF, you can go to southeastlinuxfest.org to find out more. But again, it's June 14th to the 16th this year in Charlotte, North Carolina. And so I'll see you there, or feel free to check out the episodes when they release. I'll probably be doing This Week in Linux something there. I don't know what yet, but I'm planning on doing something. Probably not a live stream because there's so much to do while I'm there, but something, a vlog or what, I don't know. Whatever, something like that. Anyway, if you'd like to learn more, southeastlinuxfest.org. Up next in the show is Elisa, or something from KDE. It's a music player made by KDE, and this latest release is 0.4.0. There's been a lot of features added to this particular release, and it's actually been, it's because it's 0.4.4. It's a fairly new application, and it's not necessarily alpha, but it's definitely it's in between alpha and beta and everything. It's not meant to be used by everyone. It's more of a testing thing right now, but the stuff that they've been adding recently is really cool. So they've actually improved the amount of supported formats to basically anything that's playable by VLC, because they added support for libVLC. They've also improved a new feature for the progress bar on Plasma Desktop taskbar entries, because you can see how much of the song is being played for each individual song on the taskbar using the progress bar structure, which is pretty interesting. And they've also improved their party mode by adding ability for your touchscreen navigation, as well as making it possible to just click on an individual track to immediately switch to it, and then rather than having to do select it and then click the play and whatever, you can just quickly hit it. So if you're using it for like a party mode on a laptop, you can just tap the song that you want to play, and it starts switching to it. So that's a nice feature for that, if you use that kind of thing. They've also updated the support for adding an undo support for the playlist. So if you actually have, like I've done this in other music players, where you have really extensive playlists and then you accidentally clear the playlist. And in some players, you cleared it and it's gone. You have to start over. But in this, unless you had saved the file, of course. But in this case, Elisa has an undo feature. If you clear the playlist, you can go back and bring it back immediately. So that's really cool. They've also improved some stuff where like the context menu now is able to show some extra metadata from the currently playing track, like composer, lyricist, the amount of times you played it, the lyrics of the song, and a bunch of other stuff. So this is really cool. And they've also been doing some development for Android. So it doesn't really work on Android yet, but they've made it possible to use Android to get music discovery from your existing collection. So that is like step one to making the software work on Android. So that's really, really cool. There's also been a lot of other things like overall performance improvements and optimizations and etc. Supporting embedded cover images and other features like that. So if you are interested in checking out a music player written by KDE, there's actually a couple of them, and Elisa is one of the more modern looking approaches to that. So if you are interested in checking it out, I have a link to it in the show notes for Elisa 0.4.0. Up next in the show is a desktop file search utility called Drill. It's a really interesting file search system because it does it a different way. Rather than the typical indexing of file searching, it does a crawling system using a completely different type of algorithm. Because like normally, most file searchers use a depth-first algorithm, and this uses a breadth-first algorithm. And I'll have a link to an article that explains the difference between the two and that kind of thing in the show notes. But what it really does is that depth first basically finds the tree and goes through finds a specifically tree root, and then it goes through basically it explores the highest depth nodes first before being forced to backtrack and expand on other nodes. So if you have let's say like a tree system, and then you have the different levels, what a depth does, it just takes the first branch and goes all the way through that branch, and then comes back up and goes again. Whereas a breadth first does structure where it goes to the next level, does everything on that level, and then drops down to the next level and does everything on that level. So it's a much different way of doing it, and it's in some ways is faster, depending on what kind of hardware you give it. So that's one of the interesting things that I want to talk about this particular software, because it is very fast. I have tried it. I've used the app image version. They actually have some other packages as well, but app images is available. Why not use it? And they do a lot of other things that make it really fast. So they don't require root privileges because it doesn't really focus on the system files. It also avoids certain types of folders that are known to be like just not likely useful, like system files, like var logs and that kind of thing. Unless you're looking specifically for those, then you probably wouldn't use something like this, because this is more of like a catch-all search thing. But the way they describe what makes drill different from other things is like there's 3 key differences. I'm not going to say exactly, because their way of describing it is kind of colorful. So if you want to check that out, I have a link in this, the show notes for that, for the actual project, so you can look there. But what they have, the algorithm difference that I talked about earlier, but they also have multi-threading focus as well as heavy RAM usage, like a lot of RAM usage. If you have 8 gigs of RAM, it will, depending on what you're searching for, it will try to use 8 gigs of RAM. So the way they describe it in their project page, it says, this is the quote part, the part that I will quote. It says, "I don't care about your RAM. I will use even 8 gigs of your RAM if this provides me a faster way to find your files. Unused RAM is wasted RAM." So that's the way they do it. And I think that's pretty interesting, because I tested it and it is very, very fast. So I didn't really test how much RAM it used when I did the searching, because I didn't really think about that at the time. But it is really fast, so it more than likely will use quite a bit. So if you are interested in checking it out and you have a reasonable amount of reasonable powerful hardware, like it's probably not good for people who have like really old hardware. But if you have a reasonable amount, like 4 gigs at least or more, then you wouldn't have any kind of like bottleneck issue there. But I think that this is a pretty interesting software, because it was ridiculously fast. It's kind of similar to how Windows has this application called Everything, and it feels kind of like that application. I'm not sure if they specifically meant to make a Linux version of that, but I think they did, because of how similar they are and how fast they both work. So if you're interested in checking it out, I have a link to Drill in the show notes below. Up next in the show is a really interesting thing that GitHub has announced. They're calling it a sponsorship program. So what this is doing is it allowing people to sponsor contributors and developers on projects for a small amount per month, similar to Patron, Sponsus, and even Bounty Source's SALT program. So Bounty Source is a thing where you have a task and you put money towards that task, but they also have a SALT program. Well, the program is named SALT, but essentially it's the same thing. It's like a Patreon or a Sponsus type of thing. And you can do sponsorships for a monthly basis. So this new thing from GitHub is a sponsorship structure with also sponsorship tiers to have like rewards and that kind of thing. Very similar to Patreon and Sponsus. But what's really interesting about this is that it kind of is something that GitHub should have probably done it a long time ago, because they needed a much more reasonable, universal even approach to making money for revenue, because the previous private project repos were only used by certain types of companies, whereas this allows them to make a small percentage fee over like anytime someone contributes to a developer or to a project. Now, the thing that's really interesting about this particular thing, since Microsoft has purchased GitHub, is that Microsoft is not charging any processing fees for the first year of anything through this sponsorship. They also have said that they will match any of the sponsored amount up to $5,000 in the first year of the sponsorship. So if you were to make $5,000 as a creator or developer through this platform for the first year, in that first year, Microsoft will give you $5,000 as well by participating in this program. So that's very interesting. I mean, I don't really like Microsoft, of course, but in this case, this is kind of an interesting approach because not only are they taking the hit on the fees, because there are processing fees regardless, they actually are paying for those, and they're also giving money to the contributors or to the creators and developers if they were to be a part of this platform. However, it's currently in beta right now. So in order to be a part of this platform, you have to add yourself to a wait list, and hopefully they will approve you or not. Well, hopefully they'll approve you if you want to get, whatever. So anyway, this is an interesting thing that GitHub is trying, and it makes sense that they would, add some other way of making money rather than just a private repos, because I actually think that they don't require you to pay that anymore since Microsoft purchased them. But whatever. But anyway, that's it. GitHub's sponsorship program is now currently in beta. If you'd like to try it out, I'll have a link to the post about it on the GitHub website, as well as that's where you could get to sign up for the waiting list to potentially join if you're interested in doing so. Also, just a quick note, thanks to the live chat for the live stream that, as I said, mentioned multiple times in this show, that I do the show live every Saturday. So if you'd like to join us and participate in that part of the show, then you are welcome to do so. But in the live stream, they mentioned that there's actually an extra feature that it's not just exclusive to their own sponsorship program. You can also link to Patreon and Ko-fi and other coffee or other things as well if you'd like to. And so they don't require you to use their sponsorship program, but if you do, you can promote other things as well. So that's a pretty interesting approach to it. Not only are they taking care of the processing fees and matching contributions made through their program, but they also allow you to link to other things if you use it. Say, for example, TuxDigital.com/Patreon or TuxDigital.com/Sponsus. Up next in the show is some interesting news, yet troubling news, and that is Huawei has been delivered a pretty major blow to its business, or its U.S. business at least, because of a recent ban from the U.S. administration that stops companies from doing business with China or Chinese-based IT companies. Not necessarily specifically Huawei, but Huawei is part of that situation, and it seems to be heavily focused towards Huawei because there are other ones like ZTE that's not focused on this, even though they kind of sort of are in that same field. But there's like other things that like ZTE is a requirement of some kind of thing that whatever nuance. Anyway, Huawei has been under intense scrutiny from the U.S. for allegedly working closely with the Chinese government and accusations of spying and IP theft and that kind of thing. Huawei has, of course, denied these claims over the years, but that doesn't seem to matter. But if not really surprised, the NSA does not like competition on spying. So all of that, all-out ban means that companies are now starting to pull Huawei products, pull their stuff from Huawei or, being associated with Huawei and that kind of thing. Microsoft has taken down its Huawei-based offerings from its websites. Google has denied access to Huawei for its proprietary components of Android. Google has also suspended all the business with the company to comply with the new law. So this is very interesting to see what happens with Huawei, because Huawei is the second biggest smartphone manufacturer. Actually, I think it is the biggest smartphone manufacturer now, because they've been doing a lot of stuff with like the low-end phones as well as also high-end phones with their Huawei Mate series. So it's really interesting because it's more than likely not going to end well for any side because of how complicated this makes it. But Intel, Qualcomm, and Panasonic have all also have reports that they've suspended their business dealings with Huawei. So interesting because also like the ARMS Holding is a company that is the company that creates the ARM processor, and ARM is a UK-based company, so they might not necessarily need to end their working with the Huawei. But at the same time, if they don't have ARM, that kind of really heavily makes them suffer from not having that chipset. But it's also worth noting that some mobile phone networks in the UK have stripped Huawei from their 5G phone launch plans. But I don't know. It's interesting because, with Huawei being affected by this and ZTE, for example, not being affected by this because of their technology for 5G, it's this really weird, convoluted situation that hopefully somehow they find a resolution soon. But another thing that's really worth noting is that free software is not affected by this whatsoever, because there was this changing of how open source and free software is associated and what laws it is under. There was a law that in 2016 changed the classification of free software so that these regulations and stuff are not affecting anything that's it's licensed that way. So because the software is open source, and then the licenses are not irrelevant to the regulations, which is nice in some ways because it means that there's a possibility that Huawei could use Lineage OS, for example, and still have like an Android-based phone, but not ship the proprietary stuff. And theoretically, they could just create a installer tool that installs the Play Store and all the other stuff, because they don't have to provide it themselves. They could just provide an installer that does it and kind of get away with it. Maybe. That's just a theory that they might do. But overall, it just gives you gives a much more credence to open source and free software, because none of this stuff would be affecting if they were focused on being an open source company, or they were using, or if the entire ecosystem was open source. None of this stuff would be an issue whatsoever. So yeah, it's just an interesting topic. I think this is where we're going to end it here on this show. But if you would like to learn more or see a more in-depth discussion, we're actually going to talk about this particular news tomorrow or next week, depending on whether you watch it live, whether you're a patron or not, of Destination Linux. So Destination Linux episode 123 will include a much more in-depth discussion of this particular topic. So be sure to check that out. I'll have a link to this Forbes article about the situation with Huawei in the show notes below. So we're going to end this show with a series of Humble Bundles because, well, I want to, and I like games and such. So Humble Bundles has 3 bundles that are currently active right now. First of all, let's talk about the gaming bundles. There are many native games in this bundle. There's actually 11 games in total, and 8 of them are native games. So there's Punch Club, Final Station, Speedrunners, Streets of Rogues, Cluster Truck, Graveyard Keeper, and Party Hard, as well as a Party Hard DLC. Now there's also Party Hard 2, but that is not native to Linux. It is available on Proton, but it doesn't have a very good rating. It has like a silver rating right now. There are 2 other games that are not native to Linux, but they have a platinum rating on Proton. That is Hello Neighbor and Diaries of a Spaceport Janitor. Now that one does have a platinum rating, but it only has 1 rating at the moment, so it could be hit or miss there. But I wanted to point out, Cluster Truck is a fun game. It's ridiculous, but it's fun. Most of these games are ridiculous but fun. Speedrunners is a really cool idea because essentially it is a platformer. You know how a lot of games there's an entire community about playing platformers and beating them as fast as possible. So, and they call that speedrun. So this is a game specifically for that purpose. And you also can do like a multiplayer speedrun thing where you have you're trying to be the fastest, but you're also trying to mess up the people who you're competing against. And they give you a grappling hook that you can go and hook the other person and pull them back, and you can get in front of them and that kind of thing. You got to check out the video. It's ridiculously cool. So I think it's worth checking out anyway. There's also 2 other bundles I want to talk about. The computer graphics bundle, where you can get ebooks for graphic shaders, 3D math primer for graphics and game development, various different other things like digital character development and etc. And there's also another one that is just it's weird, but it's an interesting bundle, so I wanted to talk about it. It's called the Secrets to Success bundle for ebooks. And these books are like a manager's answer book, 212 the extra degree, Power of Discipline, Attitude is Everything, the 100 and the 100 by 0 principle. That kind of, it's like, Secrets to Success is like a self-help type thing. But a couple of these titles were funny, and I kind of wanted to just give them a little mention because they were funny. One is called The Coward's Guide to Conflict, and one is Change is Good, You Go First. And the next one is, the last one I want to talk about is called Just Shut Up and Do It. And that's actually, you might be wondering, how did you possibly were able to get your show to be on time for once? Well, I decided to just shut up and do it. That just happened to be a part of the thing, but not really related to what I was just like, I just need to get it done. I need to be ready. So I did it. I don't know if that's actually what the book's about, but that sounds like it. So there you go. If you're interested in checking it out, I have a link to all three of these bundles in the show notes. But I also want to point out that the links in the show notes and the video description are affiliate links. So if you do want to check out any of these bundles, a small commission would be given to me, to TuxDigital, and to this podcast if you were to use those links to purchase these bundles, which I would definitely appreciate if you were to do so. Anyway, I'll have a link to all three of these in the show notes. Thanks for watching this episode of This Week in Linux. If you like what I do here on this show, please like that smash button and be sure to subscribe. If you'd like to support the TuxDigital channel, we have multiple ways to contribute via PayPal, Patreon, Sponsus, and many others. You can learn more by going to tuxdigital.com/contribute. Or you can order the Linux is Everywhere t-shirt by going to tuxdigital.com/LinuxIsEverywhere or tuxdigital.com/LinuxEverywhereEU for shipping inside of Europe. And also, just a reminder, the Memorial Day 10% off discount coupon code of FanFave that I posted a video about earlier this week is still active. They extended the Memorial Day thing through Memorial Day. So if you would like to get that, any of the Linux is Everywhere merch, you can do so by just using the coupon code FanFave at checkout. I'll actually have the coupon code in the video description and the show notes, as well as a link to the previous video to explain what all it is and how to do it and everything. We also have ways to contribute without any cost to you by using our affiliate links. You can find links for places like Amazon, Private Internet Access, and many others by going to tuxdigital.com/affiliates. If you'd like to submit some good news to the show, then visit the subreddit by going to thisweekinlinux.reddit.com. If you'd like some more podcasting goodness from me, then check out the latest episode of Destination Linux, as I'm a co-host of that show. And just a reminder, this show is live usually every Saturday, so join us in the chat room to discuss all the latest Linux news each week. And this week was live and on time. Yeah, so thanks again for watching. I'm Michael Tunnell with TuxDigital, and as always, keep using, learning, and enjoying Linux.